All right. Well, welcome everyone. While people are still joining here, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. This is a very special webinar and panel, Psychedelics for Alcoholism, the Clinical Trial Pathway. My name is Shannon Smedella, and I'm very happy to be your host for this panel. I've been very fortunate to be able to interview probably over 50 people already or more in the psychedelic field, and I get to interview some of my favorite today, so that makes me very, very excited here. And we have with us today Dr. Adi Zulafshani as well as Mark Hayden, and we have Amit Schwartz with us as well. So we are going to be talking about what it's going to take for MEAI to go from molecule to medicine in the clinical trial pathway. So Mr. Mark Hayden, some of you know, or almost all of you probably know, he's the former Executive Director of MAPS Canada, Director of Clinical Research for Psygen, and the VP of Business Development for Clearmind. We have Dr. Adi Zulafshani, PhD, who is Clearmind's CEO. And we also have Amit Schwartz, who has a Master in Science degree in Biology from the Faculty of Life Sciences in Bar Ilan University, Israel. He has been published on multiple occasions as well. So some housekeeping items before we get started. Today we're going to start with an overview of the clinical trial pathway, so you can see exactly what steps are associated for taking MEAI from molecule to medicine. And if you're not familiar with preclinical and clinical trials and what they mean, we'll explain that from scratch. So after that, we'll also take some live questions. So feel free to enter your questions into the Q&A as they come up during the event. And we also have a chat on the side there, so feel free to just pop your name in there. Let us know where you're tuning in from today. It's great to see when we have people joining us from all over the world. So just shout out and tell us where you're from, and feel free to post in the chat there as well. So before we bring on our speakers today, or actually introduce them, as you can see, they're already sitting here waiting for us to get started. We'll just give a little bit of a background information on the issue at hand, alcoholism, alcohol use disorder, and binge drinking. So alcoholism, addiction, and trauma in general affect a very large majority of our society. And knowing that there could be an effective, widespread solution that could make a profound impact on those suffering is not only remarkable, but it's uplifting. So alcohol use disorder and binge drinking is defined and characterized by a difficulty to stop or control alcohol use despite adverse social, occupational, or health consequences. And according to the CDC, binge drinking typically happens when men consume 5 or more drinks, or when women consume 4 or more drinks in about 2 hours. 37 million US adults, so 1 in 6, binge drink once a week in the US. And alcohol consumption contributes to 3 million deaths each year globally, in addition to disabilities and poor health of millions of people. So as you can see, this affects so many people. So we're going to do a quick poll here before we get into all of the details. How many people here, it should pop up on your screen, how many people here have been affected by alcoholism, alcohol use disorder, binge drinking? So just let us know. You don't have to answer, but those of you who do want to, let us know if you've been directly affected, or maybe have had a close family member affected, or not affected at all. And while you're typing in your answers, it's good to see some people: Vancouver, Winnipeg, Kelowna, Indiana. Where else? We have Toronto, Nova Scotia, Edmonton, California. Where else do we have? Houston, Pittsburgh, Ottawa, Victoria, all over the place. Glad to see so many people joining us nice and early here on the West Coast, lunchtime over there on the East Coast. So it looks like we have, close to 94% affected either directly or indirectly. So as you can see, this is definitely has a major impact on the world. So one other poll here today. This is our third webinar, so just quickly, how many people have been to a Clearmind webinar before and have heard about MEAI and have heard about what Clearmind does? So there'll be another poll up here real quickly, and it'll just pop it in the poll. Let us know if you've been here before. So yes or no. Looks like we have lots of first timers here today. Don't worry, we're going to do a brief introduction to Clearmind and MEAI, so you know what we're talking about before we get into the clinical trial pathway. Welcome everyone if this is your first webinar, and welcome back to those of you who have been to previous webinars. It's great to have a lot of people returning to see what kind of updates are going on. So thank you again for joining us, and just a quick introduction here to Clearmind and MEAI, and then I know these speakers are so patiently waiting here for their questions, so we'll get to that real quick here. So Clearmind Medicine is a young and revolutionary psychedelic company focused on developing novel psychedelic medicines to solve, as we talked about, widespread yet underserved health problems. Clearmind is one of the only companies in the market with a patented solution, and it's focused, of course, on alcohol use disorder. With a strong medical management team and a portfolio of protected patents, one of Clearmind's goals is to better the lives of millions. And with a clear focus on alcohol use disorder and binge drinking, Clearmind's first drug candidate addresses a very common and costly afflictions, which to date have limited solutions, which we'll also talk about. According to the World Health Organization, alcohol consumption contributes to 3 million deaths each year globally, as we mentioned, in addition to disabilities and poor health. And with traditional therapies unfortunately lacking, Clearmind psychedelic-based solutions are set to revolutionize this space. So today, as I mentioned, we'll be talking about a potential medicine to treat alcoholism, and this medicine is currently called MEAI. So MEAI can be described as satiation in a pill, and MEAI is considered a non-hallucinogenic psychedelic. It is slightly euphoric and gives a pleasant feeling of satiation, and of course we'll find out more about MEAI in just a few moments here. Clearmind believes that MEAI can potentially create a clear path for treating alcohol use disorder. If you'd like to find out more about Clearmind and MEAI, and there's some things maybe we don't cover today, make sure and check out the website. It's clearmindmedicine.com, and of course we're on all of the platforms if you wish to follow us on social media. And if you're interested in investing in Clearmind, which is a public company, you can find us clearmindmedicine.com. Canadian Securities Exchange is CMND. And we'll post some information and email in the chat for investor relations at the end of the webinar as well. So they're patiently waiting. Let's bring on our speakers today. So I'm going to introduce them to you first, and then we'll have them say hello. So first off, we have Adi Zulaf-Shani, PhD, Clearmind's CEO. So Adi is a biomedical research and development executive with a vast experience with over 20 years of strategic and operational leadership in the healthcare industry. She has a deep understanding of therapeutics development in heavily regulated environments. So Dr. Zulaf-Shani holds a PhD in human biology and immunology from Bar Ilan University in Israel. We also have Mark Hayden with us. He's the Clearmind VP of Business Development, and Mark was the Executive Director of MAPS Canada for 10 years. He is an adjunct professor at the University of British Columbia School of Public and Population Health, And he's published on the issue of drug control policy and psychedelics and worked for the addiction services for 28 years. Mark is currently the Director of Clinical Research with Psygen and, as I mentioned, VP of Business Development for Clearmind. So we also have with us Amit Schwartz, and Amit was a Master in Science degree in biology from the Faculty of Life Sciences at Bar Ilan University in Israel. He has also been published on multiple occasions. His research was done in the neuropsychopharmacology lab under the supervision of Professor Gal Yadid, who is on Clearmind's advisory board. So let's get into the questions. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Amit, Mark, and Adi.
Yes, Shannon, and welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining us and taking the time to listen to us.
Wonderful. All right, let's get right into these questions here. So, as today's webinar is about the clinical trial pathway, that is going to be our first question that we're getting into here. So, we'll start this one off with Mark. Mark, can you explain to us the phases of clinical trials?
Sure, Shannon, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So the clinical trial pathway has some similarities to a group of people sitting around a campfire roasting marshmallows. As we do that, what we do is we start to tell stories to each other. Now, that's called anecdotal evidence. As we continue telling stories, what we notice is some of the stories that we tell to each other are kind of similar. Your experience of this is similar to my experience of this. That's called anecdotal of interest to science. And somewhere along the way, we ask ourselves, is it safe? And then we have to dive into that. That's called preclinical toxicology. So let me play with this for a second. So what does preclinical toxicology mean? It means we think this thing is out there that is interesting, in this case, MEAI. We seem to have some similar experiences of us as we try it as humans. So if we want to know if it's safe, what Clearmind had to do is do the beginning, which is, actually it starts in a petri dish, where you start putting MEAI on live cells and you say, what do those live cells do? And at what dosage does it take to kill live cells? Once you've established safety in a petri dish, you go on to rodents. And then you give them varying dosages when they're either pregnant or not pregnant. And then you, quite frankly, cut them up at the end and see what it's done to the various organs. And then you move on to larger animals. Curious enough, pigs are very, very similar to humans in terms of toxicology studies. And so you work your way through petri dish rodents and pigs. And once you've established safety in that, then you move on to humans. And human safety is about giving humans the experience and then testing everything you can possibly test, from blood tests, the urine tests, to physical reports of how people are feeling. And then once you've moved on from human safety, then you have to ask the question, does it work? That's called efficacy. So efficacy starts in what's called phase 2. So phase 2 tests a protocol. What's that? It's what you're actually doing in the process. How are you going to actually do the test? What are you going to give people, what dosage and how long, and how are you going to test it? Now, the study of efficacy is actually really complicated. You have to have very, very clear outcome measures. You have to predefine them. This is exactly what we're going to measure. And then you have to define your population. So you have what's called inclusion and exclusion criteria, who's in, who's out. And really what you want is a single diagnosis. You just want one type of individual. So in this case with MEI, you probably just want people that have alcohol use disorder, but not anything else. And you have to have very clear definitions. That's what you're working with. You have to measure, you have to predefine all of your psychological tests and your physical tests. You have to define the severity of what you're looking for. Now, severity is actually kind of an interesting one, because the more severe the population that you're working with, the greater your numbers are. So the difference between your baseline and your healed population is much bigger if your baseline is really low. And so if you start out with really, really sick people, then what you do is you show greater efficacy. The numbers are bigger because the distance between where you start and where you wind up is larger. So most research wants to start with really, really severe people. You then need to track adverse events. And now adverse event tracking is actually pretty complicated because there's many variables for adverse events. How big is it? Is it related or not related to the study? And is it expected or unexpected? So if somebody, for example, stumbles out on the sidewalk after they've received a intervention, and even the next day they stumble out on the sidewalk and they break their leg, that's a significant adverse event, but it's unrelated to the study. So tracking adverse events is really complicated. And oversight has to happen because it's not just the people doing the study that have to report what they're doing, but they have to be watched very closely. And they're watched very closely by an ethics review board, and there's a variety of types of ethics review board. They can be university ones or private ones, but they watch you like hawks. They really do. And you have to report everything to them, including all the adverse events. And also Health Canada in Canada. Health Canada is involved. There's usually some kind of government regulatory body that watches the whole process very carefully. And they look at all of your documentation in detail to begin with, and there's a lot of back and forth before they give you the stamp of approval. And then they say, okay, you can do it, but they continue to watch you, and they watch you through the adverse event process. And if things look like they're going off the rails, adverse event will tell you that, then quite frankly, they have to shut the whole process down. Now, then you move to phase 3. In phase 3, you've tested your protocol. So your protocol seems to work well, and then it's proved to be effective at a small population. But then you have to ask the question, does this work for everybody on the planet? So then you have to have representative people from all over the planet. So we all know Canadians are very different from Americans, or different from people in the Netherlands. So you have to have in all the different countries represented. And then the regulatory authorities can be comfortable that we have represented all of humanity, and you do a large, that's called a multi-site trial. And then you prove that it's effective for everybody. And then you move to phase 4. Then it becomes kind of legalized, and it becomes available often through prescription, but you still need to track. You still need to track what's going on. And so you set up this process where people can still report what's happening, and you publish that data as well. And you do all of this through regular publications that then become peer reviewed, and the peers then look at what you're doing and comment as well. So there's a lot of oversight. Turning a molecule into a medicine is a complicated, expensive, and time-consuming process.
Thanks so much, Mark. It definitely does sound time-consuming and complicated and expensive. Can anyone turn a molecule into a medicine? Or, you know, I know there are a lot of people who have tried, but really, what does it take to do this financially?
You're asking me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Thank you. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of money and a lot of time. And quite frankly, it takes millions. And most clinical trials fail. It is not an easy process, and some fail in phase 3 after they spend millions. So it's not an easy process to embark upon.
Thank you so much. So let's get into, does anyone have anything else they want to add to the question that Mark answered there on the clinical trials?
Yeah, I just want to add that it's very it takes time, and it can be sometimes frustrating, but it's very rewarding. So that's the reason why we wake up every day, because it's really rewarding to bring something to the market that actually can help millions of or billions of people around the world. So this is the real drive behind this very complicated process.
Mm-hmm. So we're now going to go to Amit and talk about preparation for the clinical trials. So welcome. Thank you for being here with us today. And what exactly is happening right now? What is Clearmind doing in preparation for these clinical trials. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the toxicology and the preclinical.
Of course. So thank you very much, Shannon, and it is my pleasure to be here with you today. Honestly, I can talk about this for a long time, about the preparations, but I will try to present it in the shortest and most accessible way I can. So basically, in preparation for the upcoming clinical trials, Clearmind is employing a rigorous battery of preclinical studies. These are ranging from basic pharmacology and safety assessments to more comprehensive efficacy and mechanism of action examinations. Efficacy, as Mark stated before, basically just means that how effective our compound is in attenuating alcohol consumption. So all of these examinations are conducted with accordance to the FDA regulatory guidelines, of course. I can say, and again, just trying to keep it simple, we began our investigations with initial cell culture, which is Petri dish studies. These mostly characterize different aspects of MEAI metabolism. These are crucial studies that aid in determining the safety profile of MEAI by identifying different metabolic pathways and novel metabolites in various species and possible toxic interactions. After that, we proceed in a comprehensive assessment of pharmacokinetic and toxicological studies in 2 animal species, just like Mark stated, also in small rodents and in larger species. And this is done to further assess and validate MEAI's safety profile in animals. Lastly, I can say that we utilized an animal model, in this case, a mouse model of alcohol use disorder to characterize the effect of MEAI on alcohol consumption. So basically this model is, we are using mice that were trained to consume alcohol, and then we can check our substance, MEAI, how it attenuates their alcohol consumption in varying doses. And this is very crucial experiment. And we already have very promising initial results from this experiment. So it looks very positive from that aspect.
Wonderful, thank you. So how exactly do you know that MEAI is safe enough to be tested by people?
So in terms of safety, it's all our studies are conducted in accordance and under the guidance of FDA. So we only do clinical trials on humans after we get clearance from the agency to do so, of course. FDA clearance will be received based on our ongoing preclinical studies, and only after we have established a very comprehensive safety profile for MEAI. This is very basic for us, and I cannot stress enough that safety is the most significant and important factor in our clinical development. And we are definitely going all the way through with the FDA guidance, so we cannot make any mistakes in this topic.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. So I'm going to move over here to Adi for a moment. Adi, where will the phase 1 clinical trials be run?
So actually, that's a very complicated question because there's a lot of components to where you want to conduct your clinical trials, and there's many factors that actually contribute to the final decision. The route that we took and the main regulatory agency, I should say, that we are going to communicate our clinical development program is FDA. So we are going to submit what Mark mentioned, the pre-IND package, and see if FDA is online with us in terms of the clinical development, and they're okay, because as you already heard, it's very important, mostly safe for safety reasons, to show that it's safe enough to go to humans, and we have enough safety data to show that it's safe to go to humans, as I said. So afterwards we're going to after this meeting and the comments that we will receive to FDA from FDA, we will start working on an IND submission, which is a portfolio that you submit to the regulators, and it contains a lot of, first of all, I will say it again and again and again, but a lot of safety data, a lot of data about the manufacturing. You also want to know that the manufacturing is safe. You want to know that all the processes are in control. And of course, it's the material is being manufactured under GMP, good manufacturing procedures. So we are going to communicate all this with FDA to get their approval and feedback, but I'm not sure at this point that the actual study is going to take place in the United States, again, for many reasons. We are looking at several places. One of them is obviously the United States. We're looking at other jurisdictions as well. I assume that within a month or so, we will come into a conclusion. But that's a very tricky and very important question, actually.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And all of these updates, Clearmind will be able to give through press releases and whatnot as well. So if you're not, signed up for updates, make sure and do that on the website so you can stay up to date as to what's happening. So one of the biggest questions we've had through the series of webinars since first introducing MEAI is, when will this be available? Where can I get it? So I wonder if you can touch on that question. And, people are also wondering, can I participate? So if you don't mind going into that there as well.
Yes, so when it will be available on the market, there's still some time until it happens. You saw it's mainly to prove the safety of the product. But in terms of if someone can participate, so I think essentially everyone can participate in clinical trials. However, because again, as Mark pointed out, for a specific clinical trial, for a specific indication, we want specific people that meets inclusion criteria, because we do want to show efficacy and safety actually on the target population. So obviously it will have to be people who suffer from alcoholism use disorder, and they will have, that's not enough, they will have also to meet the other inclusion exclusion, again, because of the gradual steps that you take before you have something on the market, and you want to monitor everything and to make sure that patients are safe. There are additional criteria, at least for the initial phases, phase 1, phase 2, and also geography. If the clinical site is nearby, or it's feasible to go there. But essentially, everyone who wants to join a clinical trial, they can do that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I know we've gone over the steps of the clinical trial and the millions of dollars that are required to proceed through the clinical trials. I'm just wondering, does the company build equity? Does the clinical trial build equity during the process?
The short answer is yes. As you invest in each process or each step, that step has value. The more money you put into it, like when you building a protocol is what you're going to do and how you're going to do it and who you're going to include. To write that up, it's a very large document, often more than 100 pages and detailed references. So after that work has been done, quite frankly, if you want, you can sell the protocol to somebody else. And so every step you do builds equity, because you're putting more and more time and energy and money and effort into it. And at any point, if you chose, you could sell it to another company that wanted to take it and run.
Adi, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, it's completely true. And also, when you build the worth of a company, or how much company actually worth in terms of investors coming into the company and invest in the company. So you start from something small, you start from an idea. And then let's say that you have, that's worth something. But then you take this idea and you take it into the preclinical studies, even in vitro studies. And you show that your idea is actually it's sensible. You can show that you have some efficacy, or the technology that you think that will be good for something is actually good. First in Petri dishes, then you hit another milestone, and you're now worth more. And then you go to preclinical, again, show that what you thought is makes sense. It actually makes sense already in vivo, in animal models. So you now worth more. And then you go to FDA, for instance, and they say, well, congratulations, you hit all the boxes. You can go to clinical study. You can test your product on humans. You get another milestone. You're worth more now. So each tiny step that you take, at least potentially, bring more value to the company, bring more value to the investors of the company. So at the end, the whole run, when you complete the whole run, then it's huge. But each tiny step that you go by and you hit another box, it means that you worth more, you bring more, your investor enjoy more from their shares. So yes, there's a lot of mini steps or baby steps that build the company, and in parallel builds the how much the company worth.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I see we have a couple of questions coming in the Q&A. So just a reminder for those of you, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A as we're going through, and we'll make sure and answer those at the end of the webinar here. So another popular question that we have, tend to keep having during the webinars is in regards to MEAI and how it will be administered. People really want to know how they can, how they can get this drug, this solution, this medicine and treatment. So the question is, how does Clearmind expect to deliver the solution? Would people purchase MEAI and personally be responsible for adding it to their own drinks? Or could you, market it as a beverage with the molecule already dosed and contained in the drink? Another, part of that question, will health practitioners be able to integrate this into their own treatment modalities? Or will Clearmind be developing an integrated drug treatment modality? So I know there's a bunch in that question there, but if you want to take a shot at it, Mark, Adi, or Amit, feel free to go ahead there.
Can we go back a notch? And just for the folks who are new, because many people on this webinar have not been part of this process, I just want to reflect on what MEAI is and why it's different from current psychedelic treatments. Because there's a huge interest in psychedelic treatments for a variety of disorders, from post-traumatic stress disorders to depression, and it's all in the therapeutic context. MEAI is completely different. It's not therapy. It's simply a molecule that if you take, I'm giving you an example, if you add it to alcohol, if you're a binge drinker and you add MEAI to your alcohol that you are drinking, you just simply stop drinking. It adds to the experience. Initially, it feels like, in fact, I'm going to explain what happens. If you take 80 milligrams of MEAI, it feels like you've had one beer. If you take a second one, it feels like you've had two beers. If you take a third one, it feels a little like 30 milligrams of MDMA. It's fluffy and warm and pink and fuzzy and positive and euphoric, and you feel close to people and warm and really positive emotionally. It's a very attractive, not very, delete the word very. It's not very attractive. It's a little bit attractive. It's a positive experience. If you do a fourth one, you hit a wall. And the wall is complete satiation. The best way I've ever described it is you just finished eating 2 pieces of chocolate-covered goopy cheesecake, and somebody puts a third piece of cheesecake in front of you and hands you a fork. And you look at the third piece of cheesecake and you go, I cannot imagine touching the cheesecake. In my wildest fantasies, I am so done with cheesecake. So it has this, so if you really think about why you can't eat the third piece of cheesecake, you're not hanging off the ceiling, you're so stimulated, you're not flopping around on the floor, you're so sedated, you're not violently ill, you're just satiated. MEAI is satiation in a pill. It's attractive, not hugely attractive would result in other problems. So people would like to take it if you add it to alcohol, but you just wind up completely finished with, and so people just stop drinking. So it's a very different model from other psychedelic treatments that are all about therapy, and hence very expensive. Can be very wonderful because they can be helpful in treatment of depression and PTSD and everything else. But the whole model here is it should be accessible. And so essentially it should be available. We believe it should be available on prescription, and people with alcohol people with alcohol use disorder, should be able to, through their physician, acquire it and then either drink it by itself as a substitute, because it does actually feel a bit like alcohol when it starts, or add it to their whatever, wine, whiskey, beer, whatever they're drinking that they think that they're going to binge on, and they're just going to stop binging.
Yeah. So I just want to add to what Mark said, because I love hearing Mark speak, because he always gives everything sounds so interesting when he speaks about it, but it's really a very interesting question. How a treatment is going to look like at the end, how it's going to be marketed, how it's going to look on the shelf. So we are looking into this and that, and there might be some evolution, probably just because it's the easiest way to start with. Probably at the beginning it will be kind of a pill, and also sometimes it's just the easiest way to consume something, because we have to understand that the objective of the treatment that we are developing is that people will not suffer from alcoholism. So it might be that they will not want to drink anymore. It might be that they would like to reduce dramatically the amount of alcohol they're using. So it's probably not going to be something that you mix with your drink just because you may not want to drink. But it's going to be probably, at least at the beginning, as I said, a pill, something also that people will be able to take in the privacy of their own home. It will have to be prescribed, but unlike other psychedelic drugs, it's not going to be given under the supervision of a psychiatrist or under some kind of a psychotherapy. But this is something that might evolve as we move forward, but that's how we see it, at least for now.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much, Adi. And Mark, I know you've covered this in other webinars, but I was wondering if you could quickly just let the audience know what other kind of treatments are out there currently for alcohol use disorder, since you've worked in addiction for such a long time.
Sure, absolutely. So counseling, if you want to deal with the various issues that are either thoughts or feelings or behaviors, and you want to talk to and be held accountable by a therapist, that is available. If you want straight abstinence, you want group support, that's something like AA, if you've never want to drink again, and that's a worldwide model that many people have found useful. There are some medications that are useful, things like antabuse, disulfiram, but people actually rarely take it twice. If you take it with alcohol, you are violently ill, so that isn't something that really engages people well. There are some substances, there are some medicines that kind of take away the pleasure, compensate, for example, naltrexone, that just kind of just numb the experience of pleasure with alcohol, but they're not really attractive. The unique thing about MEAI is you like it. It's positive, not hugely positive, but it's engaging and it's positive, but you just stop drinking.
Positive, but not positive enough to be addictive, correct?
Exactly. Yes. Well put.
So now back to the clinical trials here. So after phase 3, how long before generics can start to compete? So in regards to, patents, and maybe this one is for a D.
Yeah. So I think you've mentioned it, Shannon, while you gave the overview of the company. I think that we are one of the few companies who owns IP protection for not just for a process, but for indication. So we are protected with the patents that we currently have until 2035. So we are good to go. And also, while you developing the product, you almost always able to strengthen the power of the patents and write additional patents over the patent, which allows you to expand the shelf life of a patent. But we are well protected for that. Perfect.
Thank you. Mark, I'm going to jump back to you here for a question here. and it's in regards to indications, other indications that MEAI is useful for. So, is there a potential that it can be used for other things like eating disorders, smoking, different addictions like that?
Well, I'll tell you what we've heard anecdotally, and then I'll give you my hunch, because I think there's a range out there. It sort of intuitively feels right to all of us sitting around the table here that alcoholism is the first one to start with. But then other substances or other addictions that have to do with consumption of something. So eating disorders make sense. If you started adding MEAI, to that bucket of ice cream that you're hiding under the covers eating, we think that would work because that satiation experience would then be applied to the ice cream. But then you kind of have to work your way down that pathway to other addictions. Would it work with smoking? Maybe, if you're taking a cigarette and then adding it, are you satiated with smoking? Not sure. The most extreme one that I really actually have no idea about is, would it work if you're with gambling? I mean, if you have a shot of MEI as you're pulling a one-armed bandit that's stealing your money from you, I don't know. I really don't have any kind of intuitive sense of that. So I think we generally agree that the more it has to do with consumption of something, it would work, and the less it's about consumption, then it may not. But we don't know yet. To be honest with you, this is us sitting around the campfire roasting marshmallows, talking to each other stage.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you so much. And we do have some questions coming in.
I just want to add that, but there's one sitting around the fire and eating marshmallow actually brought us to another indication, and this is binge eating. And this is something we have already also went public with. We announced it that we have started studies in animal to see if MEI will be also effective to prevent binge eating and other metabolic disorders. This is already in up and running.
Perfect. Thank you. Is there anything anyone else would like to add to that as well? All right. One of the other big questions that we've been getting in it as well is, where can I find the investor deck for Clearmind? And maybe Adi, you want to answer this one?
Yeah. So I think in general, you can download it from our website, because now we are changing we have updated the investor deck. I'm almost certain that you can download it, and you can always, everyone who registered to the webinar, it means that he has the contact information, and he can just send an email. We'll be glad, and we'll gladly send him an email. It's very, very easy to get our investor deck.
Perfect. And this one is sort of related as well, but how and where can I buy Clearmind stock? And what exchanges are you listed? So
currently we're listed on 3 exchanges. We're obviously in Canada and on the CSE, in the United States on the OTC, and also in Frankfurt. You can buy shares in all of those stock exchanges.
Perfect. Thank you. So we do have quite a few questions come in here in the Q&A. So we're going to field some of those questions here. And let's see, we have quite a few. Thank you everyone for submitting your questions. And let's start with this one. Yep, go ahead.
Shannon, I think the last question is an absolute bullseye. So I think it really sets the context for others. Could we answer the last question first by Shane?
By Shane. Let's see here.
It only sounds like a temporary fix if your drinking is rooted in trauma. So you go right back if you don't address the issue. So I think that's a really interesting question. Can I dive into that?
Dive into it, Mark. Go right ahead.
Yes. So having worked in the addiction services for many years, what I observe is the process of addiction intrudes on the therapeutic process. So we don't see there as being any opposition. MEI is not therapy. It's not talk therapy. It's not used in the context of talk therapy. But if somebody has an addiction and they want to drink a lot less so they can actually become accessible to the therapeutic process, MEI would allow that. And so people would not stop drinking, but greatly reduce their drinking so they're functional. And if they're functional, then they can deal with their trauma.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark. Samuel has a question here. What is the forecast of MEAI's habit-forming qualities?
Could I play with that one? Because MEAI is all about satiation. Let's talk about habit forming. So things are habit forming if they're really, really pleasurable. Like if you think about crack cocaine, people love crack cocaine at first, and then it's habit forming. They're also habit forming if they're impactful of taking away pain. Opiates, for example, are dramatic in terms of people feeling good because it subtracts pain. MEI doesn't do that. MEI isn't that attractive, to be honest. You don't love it. You like it, but you don't love it. And then it has this wall, this very strange wall that's built into it of complete and absolute satiation. So it doesn't intuitively, I mean, obviously this is anecdotal. This is us with our marshmallows around the campfire, but it doesn't feel like it could be habit forming because of how you experience it.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
And I just want to add that we are also looking into this. We want to show what kind of, probably it's rewarding, just like caffeine is rewarding, just like sucrose is rewarding. Hopefully not like cocaine is rewarding. Joking, it's not like cocaine. And so we do look into it. We're looking into mechanism of actions. I hope that during the year we will have information to share with the public. But we do want to show that although it might be rewarding, just like any other stuff that we consume on a daily basis, we want to show that it's not addictive. It's a huge difference. Because, and I saw it briefly on the questions here, that we don't want to just switch one addiction with another. So all of this has to be basics. And I hope that we'll be, as I said, we will be able to share some information about this as we move forward with those studies that we are currently performing.
Perfect. So this one's from Ryan. How was the substance discovered? Was it taken from an analog substance, plant with a known therapeutic effect? Were there other molecules similar to MEAI that were close competitors? And how did you decide to focus solely on MEAI?
So MEAI is synthetics. It's not phyto-derived or animal-derived or anything like that. It was synthesized in the 80s by a chemist, but no one did anything with that. Actually, no one is doing with MEI anything until today, except for Clearmind. And the reason why we decided to start with MEI, there's a larger family of MEI, analogs of MEI. We decided to take MEI because there was, and I always like to say that we're in somewhat different situations from other companies who starts from with new chemical entity, because MEI was sold recreationally online in Canada. So there was and there was substantial amount of testimonials showing not only that MEI is safe, but also that it's efficacious. So it's usually what you do is you start from, as we described and spoke about it a lot during the webinar, you start from petri dishes, go to animals, and then hope that it will translate to humans, because not always animals behave like humans. Here it's like backward engineering in a way. We start from testimonials for people who said that it was safe and efficacious, and now we reverse the process. We go back because we need to show safety, because before we go to humans again, So we go backward, we go to petri dishes, to animals, and then to humans. So that's why we decided to start with MEAI, because of those very promising testimonials.
I talk a little bit about the chance discovery of it. Yeah. I'm going to ask for Shannon. Shannon's the boss here. So Shannon, okay, yes, okay, thank you, Shannon. So the inventor of the molecule, it was a chance discovery. At one point, took a lot of it, like a huge dose, just out of interest's sake. And his experience was he wasn't particularly stimulated. He wasn't bouncing off the walls with stimulation. He wasn't particularly sedated. He could still walk, but he wanted to lie down. And the experience of lying down was he just felt homeostasis. He felt that he had achieved homeostasis. There was nothing to do because everything was just the way it was supposed to be. That's a unique experience. So it got a lot of people talking, saying, what the heck? There's something unique here. What is it? And from that discussion came the understanding that there's this kind of odd homeostatic satiation, I don't need to do anything else because I'm finished experience. And then we said, well, what happened if you applied that to an addiction? And that's how we got there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. And that might also be a segue into this next question from Reed here. He asks, how does MEAI react with the brain compared to the subtle awakenings associated with taking psychedelics like MDMA and psilocybin?
Unrelated. Psilocybin and LSD and MDMA. Well, actually, let's talk with the classics. The classic psychedelics are all about a spiritual experience and sort of disorienting the ego so you think about life in a different way. MDMA is about accessing unconscious tape loops and reworking them in a place of safety. All of those are highly structured therapeutic or spiritual experiences that require a lot of container setup, setting, safety, dosage, and that whole discussion around how you turn a psychedelic into a therapeutic experience, which is very different from going out dancing on a psychedelic. MEAI isn't like that at all. It's not therapeutic per se. It just simply offers you this satiation experience. So offering MEAI would be inexpensive. I mean, I've been involved with many research initiatives looking at the psychedelic process and psychedelic therapy. It's expensive. You need highly credentialed people. That's FDA and Health Canada requirements. And for many, many hours, you have to set people up for the experience. You treat people, you then have to debrief people. Wonderful, fabulous, beautiful outcomes. I'm so thrilled that wind is at the back of psychedelic research. But the struggle that all clinicians are having with this is it's going to be expensive. MEAI is not expensive. It doesn't need a therapist. It just needs to be prescribed and people take it in the context of an addiction.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Mark. We have a really good question here from Stacy. She says, I was a heavy binge drinker when I drank. Even after 7 years, there were still urges and cravings to drink once in a while. Does MEAI have the potential of being used in small doses to continue to maintain sobriety? I have known folks that were sober with 20 plus years that fell off the wagon, so to speak. Had this been available at the time, I'm curious about the cravings alcoholics get and the ability to take MEAI without it being consumed in an alcoholic drink.
Absolutely, yes. In fact, the discussions that we've had around the table are really we go back and forth a bit. Would it be ideal to have it so that people take it when they're drinking? If you really love whiskey, if you want to drink your 26 ounces of whiskey every single day, if you add it to your whiskey, you're not going to drink 26 ounces. Depending on the concentration, you'll drink a lot less. So that's one way of consuming it, but it is attractive on its own and feels a little alcohol-like. So as you take it, it feels like you're drinking alcohol initially, mild, like 1 beer and then 2 beers. So it does have that experience. So it is reasonable to assume that some people would say, I just want to have that kind of alcohol experience, but I don't want to dive into the complete problem that I get. The 1 drink equals 20 drinks is some people's experience. So if you take MEI, you don't walk that path. So we could see it being consumed instead of alcohol or with alcohol.
Yeah. And actually, this is data that we're going also to test during the clinical studies. But I would say that probably it's where you want to be, whether you want to be completely to achieve complete sobriety, but maybe just because of what Mark described on other therapies that are currently available to treat alcoholism, where you feel very bad when you consume it with alcohol and you really feel nauseous, everything that Mark described. We in a preclinical studies that were conducted, they did not see any contact between or any effect between alcohol and MEAI. So we assume that although the goal for us in our clinical trial is to show sobriety, we do assume that if people will consume MEAI with alcohol, it will not give them any bad feeling or bad sensation.
Yeah. It's also curious because in the addictions treatment world, there really isn't much of a discussion around harm reduction for alcohol. So the whole harm reduction discussion says, if you're continuing to use a substance that's bad for you, how do you use it and reduce the harm that it gives you? So the discussion around harm reduction for alcohol is usually around non-potable alcohol drinkers, people who drink hand sanitizer and Lysol. And then the discussion says, well, we need to give them real alcohol like wine. And that's harm reduction for alcohol in the context of addiction services. So this is a very different discussion because it really is about harm reduction for alcohol. You can drink, but then it reduces the harm because you stop drinking.
There's we're almost getting to time here, but we have quite a few important questions left. One of them is, let's see here. Do you think someday we can introduce a new non-prescription recreational substance that mimics alcohol but has much less severe side effects? I'm assuming this means like with MEAI in it.
Personally, I think all alcohol should have MEAI added to it. Yeah, no matter what you drink. You'd like it more, but you wouldn't have any people with alcohol use disorders.
Have you developed an anticipated price point for dosages that will need to be prescribed by an MD?
So MEAI is going to be prescribed by an MD. It's going to be a prescription medicine. It's probably will have several dosages. Again, it's too early to say. We are going, sorry for repeating myself, but we are going to test in the phase 1, in our first study that will start towards the end of the year. We are going to test several dosages because the effect that you want to get the lowest effective dose of a medicine. So let's say that a medicine is effective in 200 milligrams and 400 milligrams, and you don't see any adverse events in any of those dosages, you will go to the 200. If you will see that 200 is not enough and 300 is just it's almost enough, and 400 is better, and 500 is even better, but it has some adverse events, you will go with the 400. So it's all going to be discovered during the clinical trials, and then on the market we'll probably have several dosages.
Perfect. Is there any anticipated price point that Clearmind is thinking of?
No, again, too early, but we are very, when we do the development, we are all the time thinking about the price, the end customer coming to pay for something. So we're trying to keep it low. If it's from the manufacturer of the active ingredient, and then it also affects how it's going to be distributed. If it's going to be very expensive to manufacture, let's say it's going to be administered in IV injections. It's much more expensive. So we really, when we think on how the drug is going to look like, we do think a lot about how much it's going to cost, because we do want it to be available for everyone. We don't want anyone, because of the cost of the medicine, will not be able to get it. So we're very conscious about the cost of the final drug.
Perfect. Thank you. Can someone overdose or pass away from overconsumption of MEAI? that you know
This
of?
is part of the, it's part of the
Know
toxin.
that, yeah. Amit, do you want to comment about that?
Well, it's part of what we're checking now in all of the preclinical studies, of course. So this is the basic stuff of the toxicology, and we have to establish the LD50, which is the lethal dose where 50% of the animals die. Right now, this hasn't been established yet, but we're going to check this into this. And it looks like we have a pretty large therapeutic window, meaning that from the lowest effective dose till the lethal dose, we have a large window. So that's what you're looking for basically when you're developing a new drug. It's too early to say right now what the lethal dose will be, of course.
I have to say, but it is also that the data that we're starting to accumulate now is very meeting the data that we know from past experience. First of all, from the testimonials where people who tried it said it was safe, and also some preclinical studies that were conducted in rats, where they showed that for relatively high dose, it was completely safe. So all the signals that we currently have seems to point out that MEAI should be safe to use.
Perfect. Thank you. So we're almost at time. We're at time here. Adi, Mark, Amit, does anyone have anything to say before we end our webinar here today?
Shannon, once again, your gracious leadership is noticed and appreciated.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure being here with everyone today. So thank you so much, Adi, Mark, and Amit, for sharing your Amit. I have to learn to say your name right there. For sharing your expertise, and thank you all for joining us and coming to listen to this webinar.